What is up, guys? It is Nick, and we are back for video number 2. If you didn't catch yesterday's very first breakdown, you still have time before Oregon and Utah kick off tonight around 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So give that a watch if you haven't. I very much appreciate it. Today, in about 8 hours from the release of this video, the Baylor Bears will travel to Manhattan, Kansas to take on the Kansas State Wildcats. Kansas State is currently on a 4-game win streak. And they are currently sitting as the -1 favorite. You can lay -120 on the money line, and the over is currently set at 50.5. The weather for tomorrow's game in Manhattan should be of no issue. Little chance to no chance of any rain, and temperatures should hang around 40 to 50 until late into the game, where they could potentially drop into the 30s. Baylor is off their huge dominating win over Oklahoma, where they dominated for all 4 quarters. Caleb Williams got benched, and then Spencer Rattler came in, and then they went back to Caleb Williams. Oklahoma never really in that game, but they were in a similar spot to this a few weeks ago when they went to Fort Worth to take on TCU. They were off the huge win against Texas, which also coincided with the biggest available sandwich game in all of the Big 12, sandwiching yourself between Texas and Oklahoma. Texas, despite being not too great the last few seasons, is still one of the biggest household names in all of the Big 12, so sandwiching yourself between Texas and Oklahoma doesn't really get much bigger than that. Baylor then let themselves get absolutely destroyed by the Horned Frogs, 30-28. They looked terrible. They really should have lost by more. They looked awful in that game. I bet Baylor back then. I thought Baylor... That was the week that TCU fired Gary Patterson. Usually when coaches get fired, my thought process is that it's like the injured player theory. When an injured player, the team rises up and steps up to the occasion. But that Horned Frogs team was very upset that Gary Patterson was fired. It wasn't the same as a normal firing. I thought Baylor would come out early and hit him in the mouth before TCU could settle into the first game without him, but I was wrong. Didn't really consider the Oklahoma sandwich, which I should have, but I thought the Gary Patterson situation outweighed that. And they very well could lose again, but it's very hard for me to believe that they come out as flat as they did against TCU again. They clearly looked ahead and clearly were looking behind at Texas, feeling good about themselves and thinking about Oklahoma the next week. Baylor doesn't lose that game to TCU. They're in the playoff conversation right now. They did lose to TCU, and while the playoff is probably highly doubtful, they'd need a lot of chaos. Winning the Big 12 is not out of sight, and I just can't quite see them, after being so unmotivated and so complacent against TCU, that they don't come out at least here and give their 100% focused effort. I know it's hard to do after playing 4 focused quarters against the best team in the Big 12 over the past decade or so, but I can't imagine that they let that happen again to themselves. That doesn't necessarily mean they win, but I don't think we get a complacent Baylor team that's unfocused and undisciplined as they were against TCU. Moving on, I am failing to understand the Kansas State hype. I understand their home field advantage is huge. It's one of the better ones in all of college football, despite not having a very big stadium with a lot of noise and a lot of people. And they have played exceptional defense on this 4-game win streak they have going on here. They've allowed about 300 total yards per game, which is very good, but I'm failing to see who they've really beat. West Virginia is not a very good team. They do have a decent quarterback in Jared Dagey, but they're not a very good football team overall. They also beat 2-8 Kansas, which, despite staying in games with Oklahoma and beating Texas, Kansas is awful. They beat TCU, who did beat Baylor, but TCU is not a good football team. And they beat a 6-4 Texas Tech team that has yet to play Oklahoma State or Baylor. And Texas Tech lost to Oklahoma. And so I'm just failing to see the quality of wins that these are. I understand Kansas State is now 7-3, but they started the season with 3 wins against mediocre competition. Then they came to Big 12 play, and they played Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, and Iowa State. 2 of those teams they played at home, and they got torched for 420 yards per game. It's a very drastic difference from the 300 they've given up in recent games against bad teams. I don't think you can take into account their rush defense is actually statistically very good, but I'm not sure how good it actually is. Kansas is awful. They were down a ton, didn't get to run the ball. TCU, same deal. Texas Tech, not your vintage rushing team, and so I'm not sure how much I weigh into that. They did slow down Oklahoma State's rushing attack, but Spencer Sanders threw all over the field on them. Iowa State, on the other hand, rushed all over the field on them, putting up 230 plus yards on the ground. It's just very questionable to me, what is Kansas State against the good teams, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, and Iowa State? They got smoked, to be honest, in all of those games. They were in the one game, but overall, they did not play good defense. They did, like I said, they were decently solid, but Oklahoma likes to throw the ball with Caleb Williams and Spencer Rattler. They love to throw the ball. So it's not like they were focused on picking apart a rushing attack if you're going to feed them yards through the air, which they did. Oklahoma had a very efficient day throwing the ball against Kansas State. My point is that Baylor wants to run the football. Much like yesterday talking about Utah and Oregon, those two teams love to run the ball. Well, Baylor is a better rushing team than those two teams. Baylor is a top 4 rushing team in all of college football, and they'll put that Kansas State defense to the test on Saturday. Kansas State does rank in the mid-20s against the rush, which is a fairly decent defense, but they haven't faced a team ranked inside the top 30 rushing. Baylor in the top 5 of all the country in rushing attack. So that's why I'm saying I'm not quite sure how good is Kansas State's defense. If Kansas State's not the reason those teams aren't ranked inside the top 30, and the 32nd team is the only team they faced, and that was Oklahoma State. But Oklahoma State got everything they wanted through the air. They didn't really have to rush. Spencer Sanders tore this Kansas State defense apart through the air. So I'm not quite sure if he wouldn't have been doing that, if they wouldn't have been able to just run all over them. Kansas State pass defense is very mediocre. It ranks in the mid-60s in college football. And I don't think Jerry Bohannon is some world beater at quarterback. He's not going to go out there and sling the rock for 500 yards tomorrow. But he's very, very, very capable of exploiting the Kansas State pass defense and opening up the box a little bit for that rushing attack that they want to do. Bohannon's going to have to hit some shots. He's going to have to hit some wide open receivers that I think he's going to get. But I think he's more than capable of doing it, and I think he gets it done. But if they can't hit those wide receivers, and the wide receivers are not going to get open for Bohannon, it's going to be a long day. I think their rushing attack can still get yards, but it will be much more difficult yardage for them to get against this Kansas State team. I think Bohannon throws enough. He gets into the 200s passing. Nothing like Spencer Sanders. I don't think he's going to need to get over 300, but he'll do enough to keep that Kansas State defense honest and keep them off of them, keep them backed up a little bit here instead of stacking the box against a rushing attack, and they'll be able to churn out yards. They're very, very good at yards per carry, and I think they meet their average and get to around 6 yards per carry. And so I will be taking the Baylor Bears money line at plus 100 is what I currently bet it at. I believe it's at plus 105. I use the DraftKings Sportsbook. I believe it's plus 105 on that book currently, as Kansas State has moved back to minus 1.5, I believe. I just don't believe that Kansas State is a high-quality team. Baylor proved last week they're good. That defense is solid. I do not think Kansas State will score enough points to keep up. I have Baylor getting to 29 to 31-ish points, somewhere around there. 28 to 32, somewhere in that bracket of 4 points. And I think that's plenty to beat Kansas State. I don't think Kansas State exceeds 24 points. So I think Baylor should get this job done on the money line. I don't hate if this line gets to a plus 2 or a plus 2 is probably where I would look more at the spread. But at plus 1.5, I really don't think it's worth betting the spread. So that is bet number 2. These first two videos were a little more rushed. I had work all day Friday, came home and made them, so not as high a quality as I would have liked them. Check back tomorrow for the NFL bet and maybe an ATP finals bet for tennis. And I will try to do a much higher quality video for those and try to keep up maybe a little bit of higher quality as we go along. I just did not have enough time to do that here on this Friday night. But I hope you guys enjoy the games tomorrow. For this one, we got Baylor plus 100 is what I'll track it as. So we got, Baylor plus 100 against Kansas State. We'll catch you guys all tomorrow, or later tonight. I guess later tonight. But peace.